I am Mary Wollstonecraft addressing you. Today, I will examine a 3,000-year-old tradition, Judaism, from the perspective of women's rights. I contend that the Torah's creation story, by positioning woman as man's helper, has created history's most enduring patriarchal narrative. God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27. But why, in the second creation story, Genesis 2:21-22, is Eve created from Adam's rib? Does no one question this contradiction? Equality in the first narrative, derivative status in the second. This is the summary of women's history. The Talmud, Yevamot 62a, states, "It is impossible for a man to live without Eve. It is possible for a woman to live without Adam." What a distorting! This understanding, which makes women dependent on men, has been legitimized in religious texts for thousands of years. In the Kabbalah tradition, Shekinah, the divine feminine principle, has fallen away from God, who is male, and will only be reunited with him upon the coming of the Messiah. How familiar is the metaphor of the exile of the female soul? But the real question is, why do women sit separately from men in the synagogue? Why does a man's daily morning prayer, "I thank you that you did not make me a woman," Menahod 43b, still continue? Women's moral character is the natural result of conditions that make them weak and dependent. In Jewish tradition, women are constantly defined as incomplete. She must enter the mikveh, ritual bath. She must wait for the man's permission to divorce, get. She cannot form a prayer group without 10 men. My question is, are these rules truly divine commandments, or are they the sanctified domination of a male-dominated system? Today, I will explain how religious laws establish a system of control over women's bodies and minds. In Jewish tradition, the female body has been viewed as a problem that must be constantly monitored and regulated. The rules of Niddah, declaring a menstruating woman impure. What kind of fasting is this? What kind of cabbage pickle? How can a woman's natural physiological process exclude her from religious life? Isn't becoming pure in the mikveh and then being permissible to her husband again the clearest indication of how the female body is commodified for male consumption? The Talmud, Al-Niddah 31a, states a woman brings 3 things: candles, dough, and spices. That is, light, food, and pleasant smells. But what about intellect? What about spirit? Limiting women solely to domestic duties is to ignore their intellectual potential. The issue of Agunah, women abandoned by their husbands but denied a religious divorce certificate get. Thousands of Jewish women are at the mercy of men's whims. Why are religious courts, Beit Din, so unsuccessful in protecting these women? The answer is simple. Because the system is designed by men and for men. Women's minds do not develop healthily because they are forced to be weak and dependent. In the Mishnah, Kiddushin 29b, when listing what a man must do for his son, it says, circumcise him, redeem him, teach him the Torah, teach him a trade, marry him off. But what about daughters? There is no such list for them. Isn't this silence proof of how little importance is attached to women's education? The prohibition on Torah study. In traditional Judaism, women were forbidden to study the Torah. In Mishnah Sota 3:4, it says, "He who teaches his daughter the Torah teaches her prostitution." What kind of mentality is this? Does developing a woman's mind make her immoral? Now I will tell you about the successes and failures of modern Jewish feminism. This movement, which emerged in the 20th century, set out with the claim of reforming tradition. But did it really manage to dismantle patriarchal structures? The appointment of the first female rabbi, Sally Priesand, in 1972 seemed revolutionary. But what about today? How many female rabbis have equal say in traditional communities? Even in reform and conservative movements, do female rabbis still encounter a glass ceiling? Men turned women into adorned slaves and then enjoyed their slave minds. Feminist Torah readings, midrashim, are being written. Female characters reinterpreted. But does this truly change the patriarchal structure of religious texts? Or is it merely painting over the surface? Does highlighting Miriam, Deborah, and Esther solve the fundamental problem? Bat mitzvah, the coming-of-age ceremony for girls. Yes, it's a symbolic step. But after this ceremony, do these girls still have equal rights with men in the synagogue? In traditional communities, the girl still cannot read the Torah, and her prayers still do not count. Agunah activism. Campaigns for women denied divorce certificates. But aren't Orthodox rabbis still resisting this? In 2024, there are still thousands of agunot. Doesn't this show how deeply flawed the system is? Women's rights at the Kotel, fighting for women to be able to pray at the Wailing Wall. But isn't discrimination still continuing? Women are forbidden to read the Torah, and they are prevented from wearing the talit, prayer shawl. Modern Jewish feminism reminds me of the moderate reformers of the 18th century. Instead of changing the structure, they are trying to adapt to it. True revolution comes from rethinking religious institutions, not from joining them. I will attack the most formidable fortress, Orthodox Judaism's perception of women. Here, tradition has erected the thickest walls against women's rights. Tzniut, modest dress codes, this mindset, which views the female body as a temptation, chooses to cover women rather than hold men accountable for their own lack of self-control. Wearing wigs, shtetl, and long skirts, these are not freedom, but invisible shackles. When a woman tries to rule with the power of her beauty, revenge is the law of nature. Taharat mishpaha, rules of family purity. Women must track their menstrual cycle and enter the mikveh. But what about men? They have no such obligation of purity. Do you really believe this double standard is divine? Kollel, Torah study for married men. While men spend their days studying Torah without working, women both work and support the household. Doesn't this holy order sanctify economic dependence? Mechitza, the partition wall in the synagogue. Women's prayers are confined behind a curtain so as not to disturb the men. A woman's voice is considered erva, sexually arousing. Isn't this an admission of how threatening a woman's presence is perceived to be? The Agunah crisis. Men who refuse to grant divorce. Why do religious courts turn a blind eye to this cruelty? Answer: the system is run by men. A man who refuses to grant a get divorce document remains religious in the eyes of the rabbis. But the woman is sentenced to a life of imprisonment. Yoetzet halacha, female religious counselors. Is this progress, or is it just a new way to legitimize the system? Women still cannot become rabbis, still cannot be judges in religious courts. Orthodoxy imprisons women at home under the rhetoric of the Holy Family. It declares her queen, but confines her kingdom to the kitchen. Now I will offer you not just criticism, but a radical solution. Let us not be content with reforming traditional religious structures. Let us transform them from the ground up. Rewriting Midrash. We must reject traditional interpretations, Midrash, and write new women-centered interpretations. We must give voice to the female characters silenced in the Torah. How would Akedah, the binding of Isaac, appear through Sarah's eyes? How would the Exodus from Egypt be narrated through Miriam's mouth? Alternative religious communities. Instead of reforming traditional synagogues, let us establish entirely feminist minyanim, prayer groups. Communities where women and men are equal, LGBT individuals are accepted, and traditional gender roles are rejected. Feminist Beit Din. as traditional religious courts oppress women, why don't we establish feminist religious courts? An alternative system that will liberate Agunot and grant equal divorce rights. Women's education is designed to make them more attractive, to adorn their bodies, not their minds. Revolution in Torah study, as traditional yeshivas, religious schools, exclude women. Why don't we open feminist yeshivas? Institutions where women and men study Torah, Talmud, and Kabbalah together, where critical thinking is encouraged. Language revolution. We must change the patriarchal language of Hebrew. Instead of using only masculine pronouns, who, he for God, we must also add feminine pronouns, I, she. Prayers should be written not only in the language of our fathers, avot, but also in the language of our mothers, imahot. Ritual revolution. Let us transform the mikveh from a ritual of purification into a ceremony celebrating the female body. Let us redefine menstruation not as impurity, but as a natural cycle. Remember, true piety is not submitting to traditions that view women as second-class citizens, but fighting for justice. God, if there is one, did not create women as second-class citizens. Humans did. With this manifesto, I have not merely criticized, I have also presented you with a roadmap for revolution. The choice is now yours. Either you will accept these patriarchal religious structures, or you will join me in rebellion. Subscribe and feel free to comment. I'm sure that together we can overcome anything. See you in the next video.